Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Family Writing Journey. I'm Michael.
I'm Sunny.
And I'm Matthew.
We're a dad, a mom, and a teenage son. We each recently took up fiction writing. We're definitely not experts, but we hope you'll enjoy hearing about our journey and maybe get inspired to start your own. Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the Family Writing Journey. Today we'll be talking about genres. This is actually like a super fascinating topic for me. For genre, so genre is just the style or the type of book you're writing, the category it would be listed under. And before I started writing, I didn't really think much about genre. I knew I liked sci-fi, I liked fantasy, and if you sort of pressed me, I could name a couple others. I'll name a few now. So there's romance, thriller, horror, westerns, mystery. This is genres for fiction writing. Obviously, there's genres for all sorts of things, for movies and art and things along those lines as well. But going into it, I just thought those general things. But apparently, and since we've found out, or since we've been working on writing, there are a lot of genres and there's a lot of subgenres. And they really make a big difference with how your writing goes. Genres influence the length of your story, the plot, the tone, the structure. And there's just a lot out there. And the advice, I generally listen to a lot of other podcasts as well, and some of them about writing. And there's a lot of advice about sticking to your genre a little bit and really knowing it well so you write to meet reader expectations, which I had never really thought of. And we can talk about how much we care about that later. But so let's get started on talking about genres.
So I guess maybe the place to start is a little bit about what genre each of us is writing in and how we decided to do that. If we decided, I'll go first and just say that the book that I just finished drafting, I would say, is in the fantasy genre. I really don't know what subgenre.
Sort of outside of the mainstream subgenres of fantasy, I feel.
Yeah, that's Matthew's kind way of saying it doesn't quite fit anywhere. And I think that's partly because I never had really heard of genre or given it any thought before I started writing. I really just started writing for fun. I knew it was sort of fantasy because I had been reading some fantasy during the pandemic with Matthew's nudging, but I never really gave any thought to what subgenre it was, and hence I don't think it fits really well anywhere. You agree, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it fitting anywhere is necessarily super important, but it's certainly fantasy because fantasy is just defined as like something that has magic, basically. I mean, there's different definitions that you could go with, but that's the basic understanding. So you did write fantasy.
So what are the couple of subgenres of fantasy that you know about, or like where does your work fit?
Well, for me, I just follow what I read a lot, which is generally, I would say, called epic fantasy or high fantasy or something like that. So it's in a secondary world, not on Earth, and it has sort of a common like theme base of like sort of high stakes and battles and epic magic systems and that sort of stuff. And that's just really what I enjoy reading a lot. So I naturally fell into writing that as well.
Yeah, I think some of the focus on genre and what's expected in genre is based on how people get books now. I always just got books from the library or word of mouth or whatever, you and your brothers were reading. I would just sort of glom onto. But people, if you're looking online and you're ordering a book through Amazon or something like that, there really are categories you can really niche right down. And there are so many more expectations than I really thought. I mean, even within fantasy, you listed a couple, but there's more than that, and there's sort of sub-genres within it. I think I'm sort of sword and sorcery, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but there's certainly a lot of them, and I think that can be good and bad. Like for like from the authorial side, is that the right word? From the author's side of it, like because having specific like just like subgenres can be good for like enabling you to find the niche for what you wrote, even if it seems like Mom, like you said, you wrote a story that's sort of outside of the mainstream of fantasy, but you could probably still find some like very specific subgenre for what you wrote. And because of the whole like self-publishing and like Dad said, the the specifics on sites like Amazon, people could find your work that would like your work.
I want to, yeah, thank you. Thanks for the assumption that there could be somebody that would like it. I wanted to pick up on what can I go on a slight side tangent for a minute?
Always.
So
you have 10 seconds. No, go ahead.
Okay. So my tangent is this, and I hadn't thought of it until just what you said a minute ago, but I too used to go to the library, browse the shelves, look at just the very most broad categories, because the library is set up by fiction, mystery.
Right.
I mean, it's very, very broad. And then within that, I might find authors that I already knew, or I might be attracted to a cover or a title or whatever. But I really just browsed and found stuff that I wasn't necessarily looking for. So I know this is a little off topic, but I think it's a little bit sad in a way that a lot of readers are so specialized. As a reader, they know this is what I like, down to the genre, subgenre, sub.
Right.
That people maybe, do you think maybe people don't just find things serendipitously as much anymore, or go outside of what they're used to?
I think that's certainly sort of been the case for me because I've always been someone who's been very focused on fantasy and science fiction, and specifically fantasy in particular. But that sort of limited me from discovering other books that when I read them, I like them, but I'm not in sort of the fan base or the world of those other genres. So all I know about is fantasy, and that is just what I end up reading.
And I think even that word you just said, fan base, that idea is a new idea. When I was 17, I don't think there was a word called fan base. I don't think that I had ever heard of the word genre. I read a variety of stuff, either just by chance or someone suggested, or I picked it up at home. But I don't know. I do feel like maybe to some extent it's social media and the internet and that desire to categorize things more and more finely.
Right, but there's a positive too. If you know what you like, it's easier to find a lot more examples of that and different authors that.
But then you're always just reading the same thing.
Well, that's true, but I don't know. We're making an assumption. I, for instance, do sometimes pick up other things that are not in the fantasy genre. Not often, but on occasion. I don't know, and I think people who write generally read a wider variety than maybe the basic reader. I'm not really sure though. I'm just guessing.
Well, because I think for writers, like each book, no matter which genre it's in, will have elements of a lot of the different genres. Like romance is a separate genre, but any other genre can have romance in it. And like mystery, same with that. It's a theme that can fit in with any genre, even if it's not the main thing. And so reading widely as an author can be helpful to find those patterns and stuff.
Yeah, no doubt.
So all three of us have written or are writing something in some version of fantasy. And I'm starting on a new project, which you both know, which is in the genre of mystery, and specifically what they often call a cozy mystery or light mystery. So I'm trying a new kind of direction. So how important is it to read widely in your particular genre, do you think? Because I actually haven't read a lot of cozy mystery, but now I'm diving into it.
Yeah, I think it really matters what you want to do. I think for us, for a family writing journey, we're just trying to get better at writing, and I don't think it matters as much. But people who are really trying to publish, I think you really need to know, especially within some of the genres or subgenres, you really need to know what's expected. The cozy mystery, which is we're just sort of using that term. I'd never heard of that before. I just thought of mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But cozy is, I guess, like a cleaner mystery, like no rough stuff in there. It's like you find a body, but there's no like blood dripping anywhere.
Right.
Right.
Very little sex, violence, bad language,
Right.
anything that would be uncomfortable to some readers.
So from what I understand, cozy mysteries, and I think big time in the romance area too, from what I've heard, like there are real expectations and you've got to hit them, or if someone is reading your book, they're going to be disappointed and not like it if you don't get those things. And I don't know if that's true in other areas or not. I feel like in fantasy you've got a little bit more leeway, but maybe that's just because I've the mainstream readers or the mainstream authors that I have read, like Brandon Sanderson and Orson Scott Card and Asimov, and they just sort of did a lot of stuff in their books. I found it didn't follow any format, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think fantasy and science fiction as genres are a little less expectation driven and structured, because, well, I would speculate that because you need the author and also the reader needs to sort of go in with an open mind to sort of accept some of the things that appear in fantasy and science fiction, like futuristic tech and magic, obviously.
I feel like that's kind of true in literary fiction too, just modern fiction that doesn't fit into fantasy, romance, mystery, whatever.
So what's literary fiction?
Well, I don't know. I hope you weren't going to ask me that. I'm just
It sounds more serious and sad to me, but maybe it's not.
I don't know the definition, and I'm not any kind of expert on that, but I guess when I pick up a book that is a modern fiction, often they're more character driven, and the stories can be really, really diverse. They're typically stories that have a connection and resonance to real people and everyday life, and
not series books.
But you're right. When you pick one up, at least for me, and again, I'm no expert. I'm not trying to say that I know anything. I could be totally wrong, but I feel like I don't know what I'm going to get. I feel like you could get a whole wide range of things.
Right.
Whereas I think maybe it's more true that if someone picks up a cozy mystery that's labeled as such, they have more of an expectation of what they're going to get.
Yeah. So genre fiction, I think, is maybe.
So how about going back to that idea of like, how did choosing your genre affect the way you're telling your story in terms of the books that you're working on now?
Well, I think I'm writing or have written a fantasy book, and I think that certainly opened up a lot of opportunities for me. I think that's a big part of why I like the genre a lot, because it just enables you to do a lot of different stuff, because you're on a different world, or generally. There's urban fantasy too, which is set on Earth, but that's not what I've been writing. But fantasy sort of enables you to do whatever you want, and that gives you a lot of creativity, although it also adds sort of a difficult aspect of having to create the world from scratch. Like, you can't reference the city of Paris and have it be something that people know, because in fantasy, the fantasy version of Paris, no one's heard of it. So you have to describe what it is. You have to tell people the cultural whatever that's going on there. So you're sort of starting from nothing. But I think that's also really good because it's very creative.
Yeah, and I don't know how genre influenced, my story as I was writing it or as I am editing it now. I just thought of the books that I like, quest books and things like that. And I tried to write a book along those lines, although it turned out differently than I had originally planned. I was more interested in the character development than I thought. I was going to be interested in sort of the world and how it went. But I didn't know the expectations. And this is kind of a funny thing. There are a lot of, the word is trope. I guess there's a lot of tropes in certain genre, in every genre. And I certainly, anybody would, if you're trying to tell a story of any kind, you're going to naturally have, maybe a hero or a villain or sort of, good guys and bad guys, and, your character in some sort of peril. those things almost kind of come naturally. But there are, not that there's formulas for it, but there are certainly common things that you can look up and find that are typically in each genre. Definitely for my kind of sort of quest sword fantasy.
So are you glad that you started out with, even if you didn't really intentionally know that you were choosing a genre, are you happy that you chose fantasy? Did it work for the story that you wanted to tell, or could you imagine telling your story in a different genre?
No, I totally couldn't. I haven't put any thought into a different. Well, other than sci-fi, I could tell something.
Which is science fiction.
I could turn it more into science fiction if I had wanted to go that direction. But to make it something else would have been tough for me.
I think a lot of it just comes like sort of from what you read, and then you pick up, like Dad said, you pick up the tropes of whatever the books are that you read, and they just sort of flow naturally into your story when you're not thinking about it.
The only thing I think is a slight challenge to my genre is the length. Generally, the kind of books that I read and fantasy books in general, I feel like they're kind of longish. So we were talking about last week that a novel would be, I forget, 50,000 words or more. But if you put out a 50 to 60,000 word fantasy novel, I feel like that's really super short. I've never read one that short. I mean, maybe they
except like classic fantasy sometimes shorter.
Yeah, I really enjoyed
the
Ursula Le Guin that I read a while back, and they were shorter.
Yeah. Well, I'm no Ursula Le Guin. She was awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's generally like a lot of like normal fiction books are like between 70 and 90,000 or something, but most fantasy books are over 100,000, I would say, based on what I've read at least.
Yeah.
So genre expectation influenced the length of your book, and
well, I don't know if it did or not. I'm gonna have I don't know what it's gonna be, but it's gonna be like closer to 70,000 maybe at best.
And mine's the same. Mine is definitely not in the length expectation.
Mine was, it ended up being 2 parts, but if you put the 2 parts together for my fantasy book that I wrote, it would be probably 130,000 or something like that, which I think is pretty average for a fantasy book.
So do you guys think going forward that you're going to pay a little more attention to genre and to tropes and to expectations for specific genres, or not?
Well, I didn't pay much attention or know much about that before I started my first book. And in a way, I've already shared on this podcast that one of the real gifts that Matthew gave me as a encourager, as my cheerleader to get started, was not to worry about what else had been done or what I thought. So just to give a really quick example, I felt from just the limited fantasy that I had read that the main character, the protagonist, was usually going to be some kind of adventuresome young man. And I didn't really feel that. I didn't really connect with that. And so Matthew said, well, who cares? Well, who do you want your protagonist to be? So I decided my protagonist was going to be kind of like myself. So she's a early 50s female protagonist who does not win a lot of battles. In fact, she's
infamous for losing all of her battles.
Like she's knocked unconscious a couple times, but
so but Matthew gave me the encouragement to not worry about common expectations for the fantasy genre and to just go with whatever seemed like a fun story to write. But it kind of loops back to your previous point that if you're writing to be commercially successful, then maybe you can't necessarily just ignore some of those expectations.
My general opinion on that is
I bet I know. Is it write whatever you want to write or something like that?
It is exactly that. I think, at least at first, I think you should be writing only what you want to write. You should be just like you said earlier, Dad, writing a book that you think that you would enjoy. So you just find the stuff that you like and you write it, and you just have as much fun with it as possible, because early on in your writing journey, you're sort of it can be hard to sort of push yourself to keep going sometimes. And I think that would be especially true if you felt constrained by genre expectations. So I think it's a lot easier to get started just doing what you want. And maybe later on you can switch into more structured, more like following the expectations of whatever specific genre you're in. But I don't think that's the right way to start.
Well, and that was certainly true for me. I loved that advice. I really don't think I would have gotten started if I had felt that I had to conform to a certain thing. It would have been not as interesting and also a little bit more daunting because I'm no expert on fantasy tropes and what should happen. So
Right.
my story probably doesn't fit. It probably has some of the tropes maybe of fantasy, but I think it has other things that are probably not, because I just kind of followed my own enjoyment. I wrote scenes that I thought were funny, for example, that I read out loud to you guys,
Right.
and so I won't tell it now. I guess I won't give it away.
Too much. Yeah.
But
Too much background.
instead of there being like a dramatic battle-oriented siege, my book has a bureaucratic siege. I just thought it was hilarious. Even now saying it, I think it was funny. So anyway, I think that knowing and caring about genre expectation maybe depends a little bit on what your goal is. My goal was to have fun with my family and do something creative. But if my goal were to make money on books, then maybe I would have approached it a little differently.
Yeah, I agree with Matthew too, and you there. And the other thing is, there's so many. I mentioned that there's a ton of genres and subgenres if you really look into it.
Mm-hmm.
So your book can probably sort of fit. Anything you write can probably sort of fit into some of them. Maybe not perfectly, and you don't want to totally botch expectations, but generally, if you're writing something, you're probably fitting in sort of somewhere. And for myself, I don't know how much I'm still sort of just on the one rough draft editing one book and not sure what I'm going to do after that. But I think I would like to maybe pay a little more attention to, I guess, some specific things that I didn't really have in my book that I think actually would have made it better. I sort of have a plan on sort of a villain and the protagonist at the mercy of the villain. I have that planned for another book, but maybe I should have put something like that in the first. But I think it might have made it better if I had a few of those things in my mind that are pretty common in our kinds of books. So I don't know. I might pay a little more attention to tropes without going crazy about all the other things.
And I think that's a really good point. There's a tendency to hear a word like trope and it makes you, or genre expectation, like we're using these words,
yeah.
And it can seem like it makes the writing less creative or more prescriptive. But actually, smart people who have written amazing books have also kind of paved the way for what works and what makes a really good story. So there is a reason that some of this exists and actually can make our stories better.
I think that's certainly true. Although I still believe that you shouldn't try and structure your book in a certain way based only on the genre expectations. I think you should do it if it makes your story better.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, I feel like, been a bit of a problem in some media, books and like movies and stuff, of like trying to subvert the tropes and expectations of whatever genre you're in. And I think that's not good either. Because,
what do you mean by that?
Like maybe there's some expected way that things would go, and then the book or the movie turns it in another direction only to make it less predictable, not because it would be better for the story. Like you said, the tropes are good for a reason generally. So you should just see if they fit with your story or not and use them accordingly, not try and change them to be more original, but also not trying to overuse them just because you feel like that's what people want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds good. I feel like we've done a good job with genre today. I think we'll wrap it up. It was a nice episode. I was glad to meet with you guys. Thanks for coming out with me this morning and talking. I know it's not always easy to grab our time together, but it's always enjoyable. And thanks for joining us today out there, and good luck with your own writing journey.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.